This is not about Swamiji, but it was about one of the Ananda devotees, since we're talking about loyalty to truth. There was a period of time when we have these little books called Secrets of Prosperity, Secrets of Happiness, which are all really nice books. Nowadays, many spiritual teachers make little books like that, but oddly enough, we were the first ones to think about it. So when we first put out those books, for a period of a couple of years, they were making, relatively speaking, a lot of money for our publication business, which was always useful because we never have ever had as much money as we could creatively spend. So we had a unique distribution deal with one distributor to sell those books. And our salesman was at the New York Book Fair, and he was approached by a big company. I don't think it was Walmart, but it was something like Walmart. Some, maybe Costco. I don't know if Costco's in India, but the same sort of store. They wanted to take some or all of those books, but they demanded an exclusive right. Of course, it was would have been a huge thing for us. But he would have had to break the contract he had with this smaller company who had been very good to us for a very long time. So he wasn't really quite sure what to do. So he started asking colleagues in the business, what should I do? Every single person asked him first. He presented the dilemma. Their response was, how much money would you make? Until he finally heard, what is the price of your honor? At which point he said to that company, I'm sorry, we have a deal over here. I'm happy to share the books that aren't covered by that deal, but I'm not going to break it. Isn't that interesting, though? Yeah. And I don't think one of the businessmen knew what he was asking, really. But as soon as he heard it, it was, we don't do this. Where there is dharma, there is victory, right? Even when you're tempted. Okay. Any other questions? I have one from the break that I'll offer if no one. Okay.
Yeah, during break, I asked one question regarding position of soul and mind. So will you repeat it for sake of benefit of others?
Okay.
The answer you gave was fabulous for me. Really, I was looking for that answer, but
if I can remember it. he was asking the question of where in the body is the soul located, where is the mind located, and I was trying to remember what Swamiji has taught us on that, because these are not questions that I can answer from what I know. When I'm answering myself, I'm telling you. Otherwise, it's what I've learned. But Master says that the ego is located at the medulla. Those of you who've been through our energization, our level 1, know this point. Master says when the sperm and ovum unite, that the first cell is right here at the medulla. And that the whole body is formed. First thing that happens is this little straight line comes out. The little picture books, I'm sure you all have seen your developing embryo. The first thing is it looks like a matchstick. And that's, Master said, that's the sperm and ovum from the medulla making the spine. Because the physical spine is the reflection of the astral spine, which is the line of the chakras. So the first thing is that the physical reflection of the chakras is made, and then the nerve centers that are located at each of the chakras manifest the rest of the body. So this is where the soul becomes identified with the body. That's Master's definition of ego, which is worth repeating many times because it's very interesting. Becomes identified with the body physically at this point, which is why we feel like this is where we are in our bodies, don't we? When we walk around, we're not looking out of our big toe or from our right elbow. Of course, we think it's because it's our eyes, but really it's because our consciousness is resting here. And even people who are blind, still their consciousness rests here. And this is why Swamiji says, people who are proud, you get a lot of tension back there. In English, in America, we say, looking down your noses at people, like that. That's because it gets tense here and it gets pulled back. If you ever watch pop singers, at least pop singers in America, I haven't watched enough Bollywood to know. Whenever they sing, they go like this all the time. And it's like the ego is just contracting like that, and it's throwing their head around. Oftentimes you'll see public figures who are very proud of themselves. They're just always twitching. And it's not from their chin, it's from here. They literally have an ego spasm every time they get to say or do something like that, right? Now, Master says that this chakra, the spirit, this point, the spiritual eye, where we're taught to meditate from here, we meaning the Kriya Yoga path teaches to meditate from here, that this is actually the same chakra. Because what this chakra is, the medulla and the spiritual eye, is our individuality. We use the word soul. The better word is the Sanskrit word jiva, which means that individual spark of spirit which goes on the long journey to self-realization. So we are either in our ego identified with our physical body, not just our physical body, but our astral body with the manifestation, let's just say physical for now, or we are identified with ourselves as one with the infinite spirit expressing through this body. This is Swami Kriyananda saying he was responsible for Kriyananda. He knew that that was his job, but he wasn't egoically identified with it in that he never limited his sense of self to it. And the whole spiritual path is we remain ourselves. This is, Swamiji, most recent in time, Master, just before him, these were dynamic individuals, profoundly and deeply engaged in this world and all their disciples. Of course, it was their particular style. You have Ramana Maharshi, who just sat there, and nonetheless had an enormous influence, but didn't respond in that way. But for our path, for this ray, this is what it looks like. Very dynamically involved, but not identified with the ego, but identified here. So the question then is asked about mind, which is, mind is mind is not the source of what we are. Mind is first there is consciousness, first there is infinite awareness, and it begins to manifest through, and at some point we create a mind and its thoughts and all of those. And that is a vibration of consciousness, was the answer I gave my friend here who wanted me to say it again. It's not a thing. You know where the brain is. We know right where the brain is, but the brain is created by consciousness and may express consciousness. I mean, many people have a broken brain. People who are born mentally deficient or slightly out of touch with this world. There's nothing wrong with their soul. There's nothing wrong with their consciousness. It's just that their brain doesn't work. So the brain is not the definition of who we are. But from the point of view that this question was asked, where is mind? Well, it's a vibration. It's a level of reality. It's a part of how we interact with creation. So it's not a physical thing. There's no physical place you can put it. It's just a perception. Mon, buddhi, ahankara, chitta. I'm not going to even try to explain those well. I'm just going to give you the page in the book. But I can say it because that word translates more or less as mind. English is inexact. When you start using an English word for a Sanskrit word, you're hinting at the meaning, and then you use 1,000 words to try to clarify it. Fortunately, Swami never asked us to learn Sanskrit, so we just do it this way. I'm told by my German friends and my Italian friends that there's even less words in those languages, and they struggle even more. So, all right. Any other questions before I'll go right to the one that I was asked, because I really want to answer this. Someone asked me, pardon me, were you about to speak? No, go ahead first.
Does Kriya Yoga explain any correlation between the subtle energies of the body and the physical health?
So does Kriya Yoga explain correlation between subtle energies and physical health? Yes, well, you asked the word explain. Let me just sort of think about the relationship. Kriya Yoga, I think almost all of you know, but just to have a working definition. When Yogananda came to America, he called his expression of how to meditate, how to be in tune with God, he called it Kriya Yoga. Kriya means action, as I understand it, so it's not a very he deliberately picked a generic word. And Kriya tends to also mean, when we're using it, the fourth of four techniques that you'll learn and that you receive by initiation, that has a very subtle effect on our consciousness. And in fact, the question I want to answer requires Kriya, so we're going right there. I'll explain that a little more clearly in a moment. When you begin our classes, including the level 1 class if you want to take it today, in order to practice Kriya correctly, you have to have a little bit of background. Just like you can't become a physicist without learning certain fundamental scientific facts. You may start on the road to being a physicist, but it's not the first thing that you'll learn is physics. So if you're on the road to Kriya initiation, you have to go through the various steps. So the question was then asked about, if we're doing Kriya, does it make us healthier? There's one of the second technique that you learn on the way to Kriya is energization exercises, which is Master's unique contribution. Everything else, he said, was a re-expression of tradition, but energization exercises are something he himself created. And Swamiji said, and tinkered with to the end of his life. He was always making little adjustments. The fundamental principle of energization exercises is that energy is under the control of the will. And we can train the will to draw energy from the infinite. And if we have control over our energy, that is really the same as self-mastery. Because if you think about it, our emotions and our thoughts and our restlessness, our fears, all of that is just energy attuned to a particular vibration. If we can control our energy, we can control our consciousness. So Master added the energization exercises because they work with the physical body. And it's, for all of us, it's easier to access our physical body. You can find your hand more easily than you can find the subtle nuance of your anxiety, right? So you practice using your willpower to direct energy through your physical body, and the effect of that is that you learn the skill of mastering and directing your energy, which when you think about why you have trouble meditating, it's because you sit down to focus your energy here, and it goes there, or there, or there, or there, right? And the more you can use your will to bring your energy back to a focus, the more powerfully you can meditate. So these exercises, which appear to be physical, are actually training your will for meditation. However, along the way, those energization exercises are also marvelous on innumerable, just plain physiological ways. Because our body is a manifestation of the vibration of our consciousness. And when we deliberately draw powerful consciousness through our body in this exact way that Yogananda teaches, we're constantly energizing, purifying, liberating the energy in our body. Also, the practice of the energization exercises is an effective method of healing. You know, if you break your arm, for example, and it takes so many months to heal, what's happening is that slowly by slowly, the bones are directing energy, the body's directing energy, and it's fixing it. If you can vastly increase the energy directed toward that weak spot, you can vastly accelerate the healing process. So from the energization point of view, it has a tremendous effect on health. The Kriya itself works with resolving and purifying all the fragmented aspects of our own consciousness. Yoga means union. And as you move towards spiritual union, you begin to unify every aspect of yourself, be it emotional or physical, mental. It all begins to come together. And Kriya, as I'm going to explain in a moment, is a powerful force for harmonizing your karma and also for dissolving karma internally without ever having to live through it. So in that sense, too, indirectly it also affects health, because much of illness is a necessary experience to teach us unlearned lessons. And the purpose of learning those lessons is to raise our consciousness. And if we can raise our consciousness directly, then we don't necessarily have to go through the external experience. Speaking historically, in Ananda village, where Ananda started in 1968-69, there's a physician there, Dr. Peter Van Houten, who has been a practicing doctor in that area in our community almost since the beginning, maybe since the mid-70s. He has a clinic that serves the whole area, so he has many, literally thousands of patients, of which Ananda is only a small segment. Of course, many of the rest of his patients smoke, drink, eat badly, all sorts of other things. So there are factors like vegetarianism and general wholesome food and so on. Nonetheless, there is a striking difference, he has discovered, in the health of people who practice Kriya and the people who don't. And you might be able to parse it apart and say what is the exact cause, but just on an anecdotal level for almost 40 years, Kriya bonds are just much healthier. The energy flows with much less conflict, the energy flows much more smoothly, the karma is resolved much more harmoniously. I mean, we get cancer, we die, It's not like Kriya bond, and that's not like we're all Babaji. But we're better than the worst by a lot. Now, the question I was asked, and it's related to that, was just the most obvious question in the world. We have all these vrittis, how do we get rid of them? And it's, as I was saying, a little understanding of the chakras is very helpful. A vritti is a whirlpool. A chakra is a wheel. That's what the word chakra means. So it's a whirlpool of energy. Near Ananda village, for those of you who go someday or have gone, the Yuba River is a river that runs near there. It's a gorgeous river that runs in a canyon like this. Lots of rocks, and it's a beautiful place to be. You'll see it in tonight's movie. On the way to Ananda village, a couple of the main characters sit by the Yuba River. So spending any time at that river, you get to watch how the river flows, and you get to watch how a river forms whirlpools. And so the purpose of a river is to get to the sea. And the river is very busy getting to the sea. That's what they do. They never stop. They always head to the sea. Someone asked me once, when does the soul begin to seek God? I replied, when does the river begin to seek the sea? As soon as that spring pops out of the earth, it looks around and it figures out how it's going to get to the ocean, and it heads that direction. Even the water at the wrong end of my shower is on its way to the sea if it can get there, It's just what it does. Okay. However, on the way to the ocean, it has this super clear intention. It's on the way to the ocean. But all of a sudden, here's a rock. Here's a branch. Here's a sandbar. Here's a house. All these sorts of things have fallen into the flow of the river. And so the river wants to go straight, but instead it finds itself going like this. And if you ever see a whirlpool in a river, it's a whirlpool. It's really interesting. There's like something just keeps it going like this. And all the other water gets to go to the sea, and it just hangs out doing this, like this, for a long time. Now, we, as an individual jiva, are on the way from the medulla to the spiritual eye. We're on that journey, many incarnations long. And many of us know where we're going now. And this is the question that I'm so often asked, that is so poignant every time I'm asked it. Doesn't matter how often. I so want to meditate. I so want to be a spiritual person, but I get restless, but I can't, but my mother-in-law, my daughter, my children's exams. I'm heading for the sea, but I keep getting sucked into all these whirlpools. And some of them are necessary duties, and some of them are just habits. Every time I try to be happy, I get sad instead. Okay. Now, one of the ways to deal with a whirlpool is you kind of figure out what's obstructing it. And sometimes that kind of counseling, psychological counseling, introspection is certainly always helpful. Sometimes we're so confused we need an impartial third party to talk to us. Third party meaning we have our delusions, we have ourself, and then we need somebody else to sort it out. So we go into the whirlpool and we pull out this misunderstanding and we pull out this misunderstanding, and maybe gradually we can release the energy, which is a nice thing to be able to do. Now, another way that the whirlpool is released is there has to be a dynamic relationship between the flow of the river and the ability of something to divert water away from that flow. So you can see that if the flow is weak, it doesn't take much to divert it. If it's just trickling along, any little obstacle will suck the water away. And as long as that flow stays weak, the whirlpools at this juncture will always win. So another way to free the whirlpools is to increase the flow of the river. Because if the river heading for the sea is stronger than the power of the branch to hold this piece, what will happen simply is that the suction, so to speak, will just pop. And then suddenly, water which was going here will just be flowing with the river. Now, all of these whirlpools are the energy that we have committed to something other than a pure devotion to divine realization. And we're all in this together. There's a lot of things that we want. You know, we want to be comfortable in our homes. We want to be loved by our families. We want to be healthy. We want to be beautiful. I mean, we're carrying, all of us, a big boatload of these things, and there's no shame in that. As I often say, it's nothing to be proud of, but there's no reason to be ashamed of it either. It's just the way that we are, right? So what we're doing when we do Kriya, or any technique in which the energy is drawn from the bottom of the spine to the spiritual eye, and especially if we create magnetism. Oh, one more thing. There's one way you can increase the flow of the river, so to speak, is to push it from the bottom. And there are certain yogic techniques which we do not teach or practice, where you try to force energy. Essentially, you try to break the bond at the base of the spine and push the energy up. This can be rather violent because then that water will that force will hit obstructions, and it's not a science that we recommend. People teach it, they practice it, we don't. What Master taught us to do is the other way to increase the flow is to open the channel at the other end, that the energy flow can be limited, and if the doorway becomes wider, then the energy will flow more powerfully. So we increase the energy at the spiritual eye by devotion, by the specific practice of Kriya, in which we learn how to, in the right way, pull the energy up through the chakras and keep directing it to the spiritual eye. And then that river of understanding of where we're going and the freedom of that flow begins to increase. And then those vrittis are just drawn right into the river. And we often don't even know it's happening. We just suddenly find ourselves a little happier, a little healthier, a little more likely to make a good decision, a little less upset when the same old thing happens. So often people will tell me after they've been on the path for a while, you know, such and so happened and I just didn't react. Always before I would have reacted like this, but I just didn't. Because somewhere along the way in their spiritual practice, now bear in mind, Kriya is the most powerfully direct, effective way to do that, but any practice that increases your sense of connection to the infinite, selfless service, external worship even, any loving action, adherence to truth in the face of challenge, all of that increases the flow of energy. And all of that begins to pull those vrittis into the river. And see, not only is the vritti dissolved and the temptation to get sucked back into it dissolved, but all that energy which was going nowhere has now also been added to your intention. And this is the basis of the true statement. Don't worry about anything, just meditate. Because if you meditate with enough energy, and of course that's the condition, in the right way, with enough energy, everything else will simply solve itself. Right? Now, Kriya is more than just the one technique. It's the whole approach to life. And the whole approach to life is move our identification from the ego to the spiritual I. And even if we have to carry on the event of our life, if we carry it on guided from the spiritual I instead of from the ego self-interest, then we're also opening up that channel. And we open up that channel and the vrittis are gradually dissolved. Now, let's see, there was one more point I wanted to say about them. I think what it was. Well, in this way, what I did want to say too is, in this way you simply become someone else. Because once the pattern of your vrittis changes completely, then your whole vibration is different. You're just vibrating on a completely different level. And then it also becomes easier to hear different radio stations and to tune yourself in a different way. So just having that clear picture in our mind helps us, okay, it was almost there again. Oh, I know what it was, it was about the vrittis. There's another expression that says, God will never give you a test bigger than you can handle. Mother Teresa of Calcutta's reply to that was, sometimes I wish God didn't have so much faith in me. Which I thought was a very honest answer. But there is a metaphysical, meaning just according to these simple pictures I'm drawing you, reason why that's true. Because the whirlpool, let's say it's a karma that has to be faced, some unlearned lesson. And by unlearned lesson, it means something that I think will make me happier than just giving my life to God. And so it's not an evil thing or necessarily even a low consciousness thing. It's just something that somewhere in me I think is more important and more happiness producing than complete dedication to God. 2 nights ago or a few nights ago in the Pune city center, this was the theme I talked about. And I was saying we learn more from fulfillment than disappointment. Because if we never get what we want, we always imagine still that it will make us happy. Once we get it, we realize that it's nice. You know, many things in this world are very nice, but they still won't fulfill us like our oneness with God, because we are a drop of water seeking the sea, and we will be restless until we get there. So the unlearned lesson is this commitment to some other reality, and sometimes those lessons come in the form of something fabulously pleasurable, and sometimes they just break our world apart. But somehow, and this was something I was saying this morning, you see, things will happen to us. The only thing we can control is our consciousness in relationship to them. So even if it's the most wonderful thing in the world, do we accept it with gratitude, appreciating the divine giver behind the gift? Or do we grab it to ourselves? Finally, I have what I want. Finally, you are mine. You know? Or when something really difficult comes, do we imagine that there is no God, or if there is, he hates us, and everything miserable happens to me, and why is my life so terrible, and I try so hard, and nothing ever works? And then our magnetism, our radio station goes way down. Okay. Or do we just say, difficulties come to everyone, and if I go through it with faith in God, I'll be stronger on the other side of it. Now, those are the unlearned lessons that are the vrittis and the chakras, that are the energy diverted from our single-pointed devotion. If you think of it as a relationship of a whirlpool to a river, you realize that the whirlpool can only be drawn into the river. So let's say subconscious buried karmas waiting to express are not released into our conscious awareness, which is the flow of the river, until the flow of the river is strong enough to bring them forward. You see, God never gives us a test stronger than we have the ability to pass. Sometimes I think about it. When I was little, I learned to sew, and somehow early on somebody gave me a small magnet, which I always kept in my sewing box. And the magnet and the pins always had a delightful relationship with each other. And when I'd get bored sewing, I'd play with the magnet and the pins and all of the different things you can imagine you can do. So I always have this thought in my mind of how powerful the magnet is and how the pins can be drawn to it. So sometimes I think of all our karmas as little paper clips buried in the sand. And every time we do Kriya or do something devotional or think of God, the magnet goes across where those buried paper clips are. And the more powerfully we pass the magnet over, bigger the magnet gets, the more little paper clips wiggle up to the top. But they can't burst through the sand except in direct relationship to how strong the magnetism is. Okay, so it's a certainty that if it's come to you, you can handle it, because it wouldn't have surfaced if it wasn't drawn there. Now, this is a partial explanation for one of the worst things I ever hear people say. I'm going to repeat it because I don't want anybody to ever say it. Oh, take Kriya initiation and your life will really fall apart. That's what people actually will sometimes say. You know, you take Kriya, you start doing this spiritual practice, and then all of a sudden, all this karma starts coming. I said to a friend of mine who said that to me, she'd been doing Kriya for 2 months. I said, you flatter yourself, dear, to imagine that you could be doing Kriya so powerfully in 8 weeks that you were changing your destiny. I said, it's cute, but it's not likely to be true. Truthfully, and I put it to her like this. First of all, in her case, it was, this is in the book I just published. There were 2 events in her life which she called nuclear karmic bombs. That just did, literally, just completely, at least threaten to change the whole trajectory of her life. I said, such things, how many incarnations have they been building up? You know, how long has it taken for all the forces to come together, you know, to bring about such radical changes? I said, what's actually happened here is that Divine Mother waited until you had Kriya. And you know, who knows, but the karma was delayed until you had the Kriya practice in order to be able to integrate it into your life. Now, choose happiness. Because the secret, the secondary thought behind that awful statement, don't take Kriya because terrible things will happen to you, or I've just taken Kriya and now I'm having to face a lot of karma, is what? You're going to stop doing Kriya and the karma is going to like go away? Of course not. In fact, you'll just have to face it without Kriya, which means it's all the debris is just going to bang around in the river and you won't have any way to move forward. Or it was there anyway, controlling your life, you just didn't know it. And now, because your awareness is expanded, now you know. It's very important on the spiritual path to pay attention to every one of those little attitudes. Because I hear people say that, I've heard it already here. Today. You know, you've got to choose happiness. You've got to feel that everything that's happening to you is happening to you for a positive and a good reason. And to allow in any way your energy to sink, or you to complain, or to you imagine that your salvation is actually your curse. No, don't go there. Be very, 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 very vigilant. Because this minute determines the next one. And you want to end up where you want to end up. Oh, one more thought about the vrittis in the river, because this has also been very interesting to me. This has took me a long time to figure out. So often, I and others, you have an intention and you mean to do well. And this is the picture but it doesn't turn out that way. And what I finally figured out is we live, let's say from our hearts, or let's say from the heart right here, and you have an idea of what you want to do. And in our own way of thinking, we're going in a straight line toward that objective. So we start down the river, but we're so accustomed to taking all these little whirlpools that we can no longer tell that it's not a straight line. So we start out here and we end up here. You know, we start out to be loving and kind to the people in our life and suddenly we're yelling at them, right? We start out to be kind and forgiving and suddenly we're just running all these angry tapes. We start out to sit down to do the work at hand and somehow or another we're on Facebook. And all of it is that same flow. Between our intention and arriving at the goal, All these vrittis are always grabbing us. This is where energization exercises, willpower, your energy under your conscious control. This is where all the Kriya techniques, listening to the Om, watching the breath, all of that really makes a huge difference and helps you choose happiness. There are other tools besides just meditation and Kriya, and I want to make it clear that meditation and Kriya are these techniques of meditation are one aspect of Kriya. Kriya is everything we've been talking about. Kriya is the understanding that the responsibility for my life, for my experience, and for my spiritual realization is in my own hands. This was the revolution that Paramhansa Yogananda brought. When he was asked if this was a new religion, he said no. He said it's a new expression. When I was a young American girl in a very isolated ashram like this one, maybe a little more isolated than this one because there were no cell phones or internet in those days. So we were really nowhere. And Swami Kriyananda had more recently lived in India and was allowing himself to be more in the Indian bhav than he later became more American in his expression because he felt that he needed to be more American to win the American people, that it was a distraction to have his hair long and to be wearing his orange dhoti and his bare chest and his rudraksha beads, which he did at the beginning a great deal. And lots of Indian chants and so on. He pulled back a lot from that toward then. But I was up there in my sari and my Shri Ram, Jai Ram, just just complete fantasy. I'd never seen this country. And we were all playing that out. There wasn't an Indian among us or anyone who'd ever been here except for Swami. We were all just playing it out. So I sort of thought that we were doing Hinduism. I don't know. So I understood the relationship of, because Master came to teach the original teachings of Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita and the original teachings of Jesus from the New Testament. This is the East-West union he's talking about. As I said, I was Jewish, raised Jewish, so I knew nothing about Jesus, which was nice. I didn't have a prejudice and I didn't have wrong teachings, so I just learned the teachings of Jesus from Swamiji, which was a nice way to learn them. Okay, and I learned the teachings of Krishna from Swamiji, which was a nice way to learn them. But I could tell the relationship between the teachings of Jesus and the Christian churches. And they intersected, but they were definitely not the same. But when I came here, I saw that Master's self-realization was just about as Hindu as it was Catholic, which is to say, not very. That it was really the path of self-realization. Now, it's more recognizable in Hinduism, as Swami wrote in his book, The Hindu Way of Awakening. There's more of because as Swamiji says, Hinduism is the only religion in the world that still has the concept of moksha, that has the possibility of complete soul freedom for everyone, and that is the key teaching that almost all other teachings have lost. Christianity implies it a little bit, but it's by the intercession of Jesus Christ only, which is the guru-disciple relationship. So it's close, but it's more like heaven. It's not moksha. However, what Master did was he put spiritual responsibility into the hands of every individual. He took it away from the Catholic Church, from the Pope, from the priests, from the ministers, from the ritual, from the last rites, from the ceremonies. He took it away from the pujaris, from the ceremony, from the propitiation of the deity, and he put it right into the hands of every person and said, the only place God can be realized is the human nervous system. I love that statement because it just, every time I say it, it cracks my brain a little bit. The human nervous system? What he's saying is, the temple of God is within. That's what Jesus said. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Where is the kingdom of God? And then he imitates his disciples looking for it. Lo, is it here? Lo, is it there? No, he says, the kingdom of God is within. And when you get into self-realization, oh, I understand within. It's the chakras. It's a vibration that I experience first within myself. So Kriya Yoga is saying, oh, I am responsible. And whatever state of consciousness I have, whatever life I am living, nobody did it to me. Even karma, which in India has become a curse more than a blessing. Oh, it's just my karma. Most of the time when people use the word karma, it's to like pull the plug out of their energy. Oh, it's just my karma. You know, it's just in a bathtub, you pull the plug and all the water just goes down the drain like that. That's how I hear the word karma. See, it's so much fun for me because I didn't know anything about this. I only learned it from Swami. So when you contradict him, I'm startled. Then I have to remember where, this is a new expression. Karma is the unlearned lessons that we ourselves have put upon ourselves. And they definitely feel like a burden. That's a fact. But the difference between a burden that we ourselves walked into and one that somebody else or some God who dislikes us threw on top of us is all the difference in the world. And the difference between understanding that I got myself into this problem and I can get myself out of it. I was talking to someone not long ago about certain mistakes that were made that put the person somewhere he really didn't want to be, in wrong relationship with many things. And I remembered how many times in my life I just started making wrong decisions. You don't get here in a straight line. It's a winding path, and it leads to the sea. So I find myself over there somewhere, and all of a sudden I realize this is not a place I want to be. And the first thing you do is you throw yourself on the ground and you begin to weep. Well, if you're me. You throw yourself on the ground and you weep about how sincere you are and how hard you've tried, and here you are again, and will it ever work out? Once I was, this was close to the last time I wept tears of self-pity, which are a certain kind of tears, anger and self-pity tears. Something really annoyed me, and my inclination was to cry. I don't much anymore, but I used to. And I lay down on my bed to have, as all you women know, what we call a good cry. I don't know why we call it that, but that's what we call it. So I lay down to have one. And I was lying on my back, and the tears were beginning to stream. And then I just had this thought, this fabulously liberating thought. When you spend time crying like this, it just wears you out. You are so tired when it's done. Your eyes are puffy, your nose is running. You're just so tired. But sooner or later, you're going to finish crying, you're going to get up, and you're going to just go back and deal with the rest of your day, except you're going to be exhausted. And I thought, what is the point? And I just got up, just like that. Just got up and walked back to the world I was in. And many times, when you stumble and fall, of course you stumble and fall, because these darn little vrittis just suck you in. It seems like such a good idea, and then there you are. You're just finished. But you got yourself in there, just get yourself out. I mean, it's just almost literally, I was doing the wrong thing, I think I'll start doing the right thing. And see, what happens also, which is a really important factor, is that the power of the universe wants you to be happy. This is the happy ending. The sea is a really nice place to be. And the closer we get to it, the more you feel the fresh air and the cool breezes and that sort of exhilarating sense that the ocean gives us. Even just facing it, little tiny molecules of that start coming to you. And more than that, the ocean is calling us, just as the ocean is calling the river. There's a force. This is not a passive universe. This is another aspect of understanding this. It's calling us. And so when we go against that flow to make ourselves miserable, there is also a force pulling us that direction. The universe is not neutral. There is a force pulling us away from the light, and the light is pulling us toward it. But when we pull away from the light, it's harder because we suffer more and we're going against our own nature. And we always know that. there was a lot of conversation in America at a certain time about self-acceptance. And there were a lot of New Age events, and sometimes Swami Kriyananda was at one. And I hope I don't offend any of you by saying that, but he talked about this once. Some teacher stood up and said, "Let's everyone give ourselves a big hug," like this. and then the crowd was led in the chant, "I love myself just the way I am." Swami was silent. He neither hugged himself nor chanted. And then when it was his turn to speak, he said, "There's no reason to love yourself just the way you are. There's a great deal about you that is not at all lovable." He said the only pathway to true self-acceptance is to have a clear conscience. Isn't that interesting? You can't just settle for less and just say, "I'm full of delusions, I'm not really doing the right thing. I'm caught in all these whirlpools of karma, but that's just fine." You might let me put it this way. There's two ways to feel better, because there is this force that's pulling us toward divinity. And what I was trying to say is when we begin to cooperate with that, we call it the grace of God. And it's real. There's a real force that begins to try to help us. And the satisfaction of our own clearer conscience also begins to help us. But also there's a force that says, "Oh, it's way too much effort. It's just my karma." Master said in America, he put it this way. In India, because the teaching of self-realization is well known, everyone knows that it takes a really long time. And so there's often this thought, well, in some lifetime, now it's my karma to do this, and in some lifetime, maybe I'll do it. Master said in America, they didn't know anything about this. So when he said, "You can realize God," the naive Americans said, "Yes!" like that. And many did. Because why not? Like that. But there are two forces. And this gets into other complex and subtle teachings. I have a website with literally hundreds of classes on it, so all of these subjects are all explained and you can hear it all. Swami Kriyananda has hundreds of hours on these subjects. So I feel okay just throwing tidbits. But one of these is, and many other teachers, I was just talking about some of us, there's this force that tells us you'll feel better if you put out less energy, if you become less aware, and just shrink down and become smaller. I mean, all of us face that, don't we? Oh, I could get up early and meditate. Or I could just stay in bed a little longer. After all, I've been working hard. I don't really need to get My friend used to set her clock for 4 a.m. every morning. She'd wake up every morning at 4 and then reset it for 5:30. In the early years of Ananda, when we had no electricity and no money, really no money. I think in India it's possible to be much poorer than anybody in America can be. But nonetheless, for our backgrounds and realities, we were very poor. And because we had no electricity and we were way out in the country like this, your flashlight was a very important tool, because when there was no moon, it was really dark. So flashlight batteries were always a major expense that you had to put into your tiny budget to make sure that your flashlight always worked. So Nitai, whom some of you know or may meet here, had a system. This was his system. He said he posited his cheapness against his laziness. So when his alarm would go off, he would throw his flashlight he would turn on his flashlight and throw it across the room. So then he would have to lie in bed and watch the flashlight battery go down and have all that money be wasted, posited against whether he was going to go back to sleep or not. Because once he could get out of bed, he could stay up. It worked. It worked for him. So back to what I was saying. There's always that part of us that thinks that less energy and less awareness. Somebody comes to you and tells you that there's a serious problem in your family, and you say, "No, not really." The teacher of your child comes and said, "There's really something we have to look into with your son." "Not my son." Somebody comes and tells you, you know, that your wife is having a difficulty, your husband's having, no, not my husband, not my wife. They tell you, you know, you understand. There's a point where we just think if I just blank it out, then somehow it'll be better. If I just sleep more, it'll be better. Then there's the other part that says, the more dynamically aware and the more dynamically engaged I am, the happier I will be. And that's superconscious versus subconscious is one of the way we say it. But that's the happiness choice that we're making all the time. And the I love myself just the way I am, everything about me is already perfect, it does feel good. There's an enormous release of tension. I don't have to try anymore because I'm just fine. And a lot of people will teach you, and I say it's a progressive stage. It's better to love yourself as you are than to hate yourself as you are. I think that everything is progressive and directional. If you think that you're just worthless and terrible, it's better to love yourself as you are. But then the next question is, can I be better than this? And the real choice for happiness is the choice for expanding awareness. And that's what I'm trying to talk about here. And the way we motivate ourselves to do it is every way possible that we can to try to give ourselves an experience of what that feels like. So we have a point of comparison. Chanting, meditation, prayer, good company, uplifting music, uplifting entertainment, positive environment, anything you can do that touches into uplifted joy will be a motivating force to make you to want more of it. As Master says, if you feasted on, you know, fabulous fresh food, it's very difficult to go back to eating stale things. So even the soul who aspires spiritually and doesn't hold to it, you've tasted it, and you're going to go back. Now, do I have any more questions? Yes, Vijay.
Could you just tell me who is who? I'm sorry
Oh,
to be so ignorant. So, of course, I can recognize Yogananda and Krishna, of course, and that's Jesus, I suppose.
Yes.
And I can't.
Well, why don't I just tell you then?
Yeah.
Okay. This, and I'll tell you in a way that will be enlightening for those who are familiar with them also. In autobiography of not an autobiography of a yogi, in the Path, Swami's biography, he talks about, it's called His Last Days. It's a chapter in the Path that's well worth reading. And he's talking about Yogananda's passing from this world. And he's talking about these great currents of cosmic energy that are actually, as he describes it, the real guiding forces of this planet. That politicians and nations and armies and countries are all actually being guided from a higher reality than they themselves realize. I was talking about this perhaps in another city, but Master gave some very startling facts of, he said about himself, Yogananda said about himself that he put the thought into President Harry Truman's mind that he should go to war in Korea to stop the incursion of communism. Now, we've talked about being radio receivers, and we've sort of talked abstractly about states of consciousness. Well, the masters are also projecting thoughts. And, you know, to be in tune with a master is to be in tune with his ray. Swami, I'm diverging, but I won't forget. Swami Kriyananda was a very powerful and magnetic leader, but he led by magnetism, not by exact instruction. And many years ago, someone published a small book about our community. I don't remember the name of it now, but she interviewed a lot of different people about their experiences and then published it as a story. And two individuals, I won't bother to mention their names, in two cases they told a story of being given some enormous, to them, incomprehensible assignment. And then, sort of half-jokingly, they said, and Swami just left us there. And, you know, when you're talking, sometimes you joke a little, you know, and so there it was. Swami gave us the responsibility, then he just left us to figure it out. Swami read that book, and in both cases he called them up and he said, I never left you. Just like that. I never left you, I was always with you. And he made them change it in the book, because he was always projecting the thought out there, and they were deciding what they would tune into. When my husband and I worked to develop our community in Palo Alto, and we leased an apartment complex and we turned it into a community. That's where we still live. And it was a tremendous amount of work. It was fun, but it was a lot of work, and we were moving very fast, doing lots of things over several years. And there was a flow, is what I would call, to what we were doing, and we always seemed to know what to do next. Some of it was because I remembered what Swami had done, but it was more than that. We just always seemed to know what to do next. And when we were dedicating that community, Swamiji was there, and he was sitting on the dais somewhat behind me. I was at a microphone like this, and all of a sudden, it's just like, I had this really eerie feeling that Swamiji had been directing the whole thing from the start to the finish. And for some reason, I hadn't quite been aware of it as directly as I felt it in that moment. And you'll hear him say, I founded 9 communities, he'll say. You know, I founded the Palo Alto community. And he wasn't there. And we actually even seldom talked about it. I mean, he didn't guide us. We didn't say, what should we do, what should we do? But he did, because he was always sending the energy out about how it should be done. And by the grace of God, that's what we just felt to do. And he knew it, and we knew it. Now, in the book, Swami's book, he talks about these great masters and the ones who take responsibility for certain aspects of this planet. On other planets, there are other masters. Swamiji told us of a dream he had once, maybe 15 years ago. He said, and the way he told it, I think it was a super conscious dream, it really happened. In the night, he was visited by a delegation from some other planet. And they had come to him, and they really wanted him to come to their planet because they needed his spiritual guidance. And so they were trying hard to persuade him. And he was, you know, he was touched by their desire for his help, and he was seriously considering going, he said. And then he thought, oh, another culture, another language. So he declined the invitation. I wonder, would he have died if he had gone with them? Would he have traveled astrally? Would he have, you know, done that job at night and this one in the daytime? You know, he never said any more. But the way he said it, I think it was real. Some higher civilization saw his light and wanted it to come. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable. So Swamiji has described that these masters, because Babaji declares that in a previous incarnation he was Krishna. Yogananda has declared that in that incarnation he himself was Arjuna. I know for those of you who are newer, these might be ideas that you have to take a moment to integrate, so I repeat them only that the Master said so. I would have no way of measuring. But the point that Swami's making and Master was making by saying this is that there are these long currents of divine energy that are happening all the time. And that this particular line of gurus has incarnated in different forms at different times, in different ages, and have been different prominent spiritual personalities. Of course, many great spiritual leaders have been prominent personalities, because when an individual attains self-realization and makes the decision to help others, that can go on for a long time, because some of their disciples don't learn so fast. And so they often have to keep coming back. Plus, the fate of the nation, the fate of the planet is in their hands. So this is a particular set of masters. And Yogananda describes that this teaching begins with Jesus, because the story as it's told in Autobiography of a Yogi, and when you hear the masters tell stories like this, you don't really know exactly what you're looking at. But this is how it's told. Jesus appeared to Babaji. Babaji is an ever-living Himalayan yogi. He's very well known in India. He's by no means owned by this line of gurus. Babaji has a big work of which we're just a little part of it. Babaji is a deathless Himalayan master. Jesus appeared to Babaji and said, "My followers in the West have remembered that they should love one another and be serviceful, but they've forgotten my teaching of inner communion." In other words, church doctrine has forgotten self-realization. They have pieces of it, but not all of it. So Jesus appeals to Babaji and says, we have to do something about this. And furthermore, between those two masters, because we are in an ascending age of consciousness, ascending Dwapara, Sri Yukteswar declared, even though the tradition is different than that, and that this is a time when the East and the West have been kept separate. The East is specialized in spirituality, the West in material success. Now is the time for those two forces to come together, which doesn't take a master to say it. Look around. I live in Silicon Valley. I went to Starbucks in Gurgaon and I thought I was in Palo Alto because it was filled with Indian people with their computers open, which is exactly what the Starbucks where I live looks like. And I literally forgot where I was. I was very, very confused. And anyone who comes to visit me always has relatives in my area. That's just the way it is. In fact, Indian people are being dispersed all over the planet. Just everyone, has your offspring are everywhere right now, or your cousins or your brothers. But this, according to Yogananda telling it, this was part of the plan, was that these two forces needed to come together. So out of that request, this force began. So Babaji's next disciple is Lahiri Mahashaya, Sham Lahiri, called Mahashaya, great soul. And he was a householder. See, one of the aspects of this is that we're shifting from the necessity to renounce the world in order to be spiritual, to be able to be spiritual in the midst, to bring spirituality into the world. So the first disciple is Lahiri Mahashaya, who doesn't meet his guru until he is already a married man, as they say, with modest responsibilities, 2 sons and a wife, and a job working as a government accountant. He wanders into the Himalayas, meets his guru Babaji, is given the technique of Kriya Yoga. This is a key, because during the dark ages of Kali Yuga, the teaching of Kriya was withdrawn into the mountains and it was very difficult to access it. So Babaji gives Lahiri Kriya. He says to Lahiri, give this technique only to those who are willing to renounce everything for God. Lahiri says, gee, I'm not going to be initiating very many, am I? In so many words. And then Lahiri says, but many people who are unable to make that supreme sacrifice would be greatly helped by Kriya. And this is the poetic story. Babaji says, let it be so. So Lahiri goes back to his life in Varanasi. He continues to be a father to his children, a husband to his wife, and a government accountant. And he starts practicing Kriya. This is how the story is told. He was in fact self-realized before, but this is the story. And gradually, as bees find the flower, people began to come, and he initiated thousands of people into Kriya Yoga, just from his little house in Varanasi, one of whom was Sri Yukteswar. And so Sri Yukteswar becomes a disciple of Lahiri, practices Kriya Yoga. He too started as a householder, married, had a daughter. After his wife died and his daughter was settled, he became a sannyasi at Babaji's request, became a Swami. He set up his ashram. He had very few disciples, but one of his disciples was Yogananda, who was born in Bengal in 1893. And he found Sri Yukteswar. Autobiography of a Yogi is an enormous amount about his training with Sri Yukteswar, about Babaji, about Jesus. And eventually, Yogananda gets the divine call that he's to go to the West. And at which point Sri Yukteswar and Babaji inform him, again, all these things are just the fairy tale that the masters tell us, that he is in fact the destined messenger by Christ to take this message to America and then to bring about the blending of East and West. Now, Swami Kriyananda, when he first came here, felt that when Self-Realization Fellowship, which is the other Yogananda organization, when they just, in America we just have Jesus at the center of the altar. We don't have Krishna. Because it's radical enough to have Jesus share the altar with other gurus from an Orthodox Christian point of view. Krishna just doesn't have to be part of it because Krishna is represented by Babaji. Even though the original teachings of Krishna, the original teachings of Christ are the union, Babaji represents Krishna. So the altar as it looks in America just has Jesus here. So when Self-Realization Fellowship came to India, they just added a picture of Krishna. So if you go to the SRF temples, you'll find there's one more picture and it's Krishna. Swamiji didn't feel that was right because that isn't what Master himself did. At the same time, he felt it was a little hard to put Jesus in the middle of an Indian altar and have Indians not think we were Christian missionaries in disguise, which seemed like a really bad idea. So he had this painting commissioned in an effort to try to show that both are important, but and we've been working with it for about 10 years, and I'm beginning to understand. I've been staring at it a lot since I've been in India, and I can see what it is that he's trying to do, because really Babaji represents Krishna, but still we want people to understand this has nothing to do with the church's definition of Christianity. Okay, does that make sense? All of these souls are passed away except Babaji, who's ever living. And Yogananda died in 1952. Kriyananda met Yogananda in 1948. Spent 4 years with him, and then Yogananda passed away. And then Kriyananda just carried on all those years afterwards until last April. Okay? There's Self-Realization Fellowship is the organization Yogananda founded, YSS in India. And they have the same altar almost, and essentially the same teachings. After that, there are many, many disciples, many lines of inspiration in which you see one or more of these masters, because their work is, nobody owns it. Just any disciple can take it and go where they think it ought to go. Okay, Prisha.
I think a few days ago you and I were walking along the path, and you said something about Swamiji once said his subconscious and his superconscious were one. What was that?
Okay. Swamiji, Prisha was reminding me I'd made a comment about Swamiji. I'll just explain what I said there. Once Swamiji said to me that his dream life was identical to his waking life. That he never did anything in his sleep, in his dreams, that wasn't exactly consistent with his ordinary waking consciousness. There was never any revealed desires, there were never any anger, incidents of anger, disappointment, regret, longing. All of us know sometimes when we fall asleep, odd things happen. Just feelings or situations that we don't necessarily express normally. Fears is a common one. You have nightmares of various kinds. Because we have subconscious, which is another word for vrittis, which on our conscious level we may hold at bay, but if they're strong, they'll break through when we're asleep. And Swamiji he started the conversation with that comment, which is that it's a seamless reality. There's no place at which his consciousness shifts into something else. And that was coupled once with and this is not so terribly scientific, but it was still interesting. There's a camera, a device that you can take a picture of a person's aura. And he was in Australia, and they took a picture of his aura. And the woman who developed the picture, she actually came out and she knelt before Swamiji. I mean, in Australia, this is very unusual. Not so unusual here, but there. Because she had never seen an aura like his. It was entirely indigo blue. There was nothing. There was nothing in it except indigo blue. And she perceived, I feel rightly, that she was looking at a free soul. And she was very moved by that spiritually. I was talking with Swami just about all these parts. What does that mean? If there's no difference, well, that means that there's no subconscious. There's nothing left that isn't completely free and expressed. And so that was what I was saying to you. When one of the books I've written is about Swami Kriyananda, and there's a story in there that touches on that. There was a few things in that book that he actually said to me that he wouldn't quite let me say that way. So you'll find that story in there, but it's toned down just a little. He just didn't feel it was seemly for me to put it out the way he actually said it to me. But now I will, because it is what he says. It's just interesting. It's interesting to, from my point of view, someone asked me once, what does it mean to be a master? And it's a hard question for me to answer. But I had one moment once when just suddenly it was like all of my, everything went into perfect freedom. And I just got a glimpse of what that would feel like. And so it's helpful to hear, how a free soul describes his own reality. Because one, it makes us realize that even though the view might be pretty good from here, it's going to be better from the top. And that we don't really want to just lie down here in this grass because it looks nice. We have a long ways to go. So it helps us to appreciate them, but really mostly it helps us to appreciate our own potential in going forward. So that we'll see, I can be better than I am. This is good, but it could be better. Yeah. Because I started that this morning. The goal of the spiritual path is freedom. See, we're always being compelled by our subconscious. Maybe we were bitten by a dog in a past life and we see dogs and we're afraid of dogs. We don't even know why. We meet somebody and for some unknown reason we're utterly compelled toward them or away from them. Because we have all these subconscious realities left over from other incarnations and we're not free in our responses. We're totally bound by this endless series of responses. And that's why we head out in one direction and end up over here. So the spiritual path is gradually becoming fully aware and then utterly resolved, so that the energy moves from identification with limitation to identification with freedom. Okay? Any other comments or questions before we break for tea? Telling you that tea is next might discourage you from questions. Yes, go on.
Asha, can you explain the statement that every desire needs to be fulfilled?
Oh dear. Gaurav asked about a statement that Master made, that every desire has to be fulfilled. Swamiji himself said he found that chilling. Master said at one point, just every desire that you have has to be fulfilled. Swamiji said, even the desire for an ice cream cone or something like that, he said, yes, just like that. Now, the way to think about that is this way. Everything that we think will make us happy except complete surrender and attunement to what God wants for us. If you think of desire as just simply the ego having an opinion about where its happiness is going to come from versus being a pure and uninterrupted channel for higher consciousness. The way Master described himself, he never did anything except that Divine Mother told him to. He tells a story about how he went into a certain house and I think it was a relative of his, I don't remember the details, had died, and Master brought the soul back into the body and cured him. And Swamiji or someone was asking Master, was it Divine Mother's will that you do that? He said, well, I never would have done it if it weren't. He didn't just go and do it because, they're unhappy, I'll just go fix him. It was that every impulse was divinely inspired and there was no conflicting cross-current of ego. With Swamiji, I saw it act out in a very interesting way. He would often make decisions that you couldn't quite understand where they were coming from. But he was very attuned in the moment and he would just respond to the energy as it was. And then sometimes it would unfold in ways that looked calculated, as if he'd thought about it in advance. But it wasn't that at all. It was that he was accustomed to feeling the flow of grace through him and he would simply follow it without any conflicting cross-current. And then the next thing and the next thing would happen, and it would simply unfold. So if we have likes and dislikes, if we have desires, if we have fears, when the divine impulse comes to us, we're likely to cloud that. Oh, but I couldn't do that. Oh, what would my mother say? You know, what will the people say? Oh, I'm afraid. How could I possibly? And we don't think of those as desires, but they are a commitment of energy of self-interest and ego that can cloud the divine flow. So fulfilled means that when we direct energy in that way, it has to finish itself before we're free to go forward. We think, oh, worrying about myself in this situation is important. And so we get to find out what the consequences of that behavior are. A desire is an unlearned lesson. Is this going to actually make me happier than just following the divine flow? Now, bear in mind, Master gave the monks money to go out and buy ice cream. So it's not as if we can never buy ice cream. It's that if we plan to desire and our happiness is conditioned by that desire, we have to finish that lesson. And we have to find out whether, in fact, happiness does lie in that reality. You see? And then once we know where our happiness comes from, you can live very free in this world because you're just an event. One of my early memories of Swamiji, I was a food fanatic when I came to Ananda. I thought I was nearly a saint because I hadn't had sugar in 3 years. I was a little confused, but I had a lot of willpower. Very early, like within a few weeks of coming to Ananda, so we lived from town, not quite as far as you do here, but a distance, and we had no facilities, so if we wanted anything, we had to go to town. Swami takes a whole group of us to town, about a dozen in a couple of cars, and he takes us to Swenson's ice cream parlor, right? Swami became very restricted in what he could eat later in his life, but he was an exuberant person then. So we sit down at Swenson's ice cream parlor. Swami's at the foot of the table, or the head of the table, and I'm at the foot. I'm sure he somehow maneuvered that. There's like 6 or 7 people on each side, and then I watch them all, led by Swamiji, looking at the menu, discussing the different sundaes, talking about banana splits versus hot chocolate, and and then ordering these huge plates of ice cream, all covered with sundaes, and reaching with their forks across to taste everybody else's. I ordered plain water, no ice, please. And I sat there like this, watching all these people enjoy themselves immensely, piously sipping my water. Fortunately, I thought, there's something wrong with this picture, and I think it's me. So it isn't really about what you're experiencing, it's how you've conditioned your happiness. And that's really what Swamiji, Master was saying in that. Everything that conditions your happiness has to be resolved. He used the word fulfilled because usually we don't let it go until we've tested it. We don't learn from being told, we learn from our own experience. Okay? Speaking of ice cream, yeah. All right. I think that will do us. I think we can go for tea now. Speaking of tea, we'll fulfill our desire for tea. Thank you all very much.